All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and get this thing started. We've got quite a few people on board. We had 122 sign up. We've got about half of those people on at the moment. So it's 2:05. Welcome everybody to our short-term rental best practices webinar today. We're going to talk about how to maximize your income and minimize your stress. We have our guest speaker, Sabrina Calnan, joining us. My name is Brad Uhlig, and my business partner, Jay Peterson, is here as well. Just before we get into Sabrina's presentation, just a little background on West Peak Properties. West Peak Properties, we're basically here to help you create cash flow and build wealth through investing in real estate. We're a full service brokerage company specializing in investment properties ranging from a single family or a condo up to larger apartment buildings. We can help you find it, analyze it, buy it, manage it, fix it, flip it, sell it, 1031 exchange, you name it. We're here to help our investors do all of the above. We've been around for a little over 12 years now, and Jay and I and our associates have over 40 years of combined experience. We do own properties ourselves. We speak the language. We understand what investors look for and need. We have a very extensive investor network that we've built over the last 10 plus years. And a lot of our deals, I'd say about 20% of our transactions happen off market every year. So be sure, if you're not already, to be signed up for our email distribution list so you can see our opportunities before they hit any of the property databases. We don't do property management ourselves, but we do partner with several experienced property management partners, and we have vetted those out for you. We can help you with that as well. Today, we're going to be talking about Airbnbs. Our next webinar is going to be on what's involved with accepting Section 8, now that the city of Denver is requiring landlords to look at that as an income source. We may throw in some information on rental assistance and the eviction moratorium, depending on what's happening at that time when we do that webinar. You can also check out our past webinar recordings. We've had a few of them that are on our the education tab of our website, westpeakproperties.com. We've got recordings on there of best property management practices, 1031 exchange, tax planning tips for 2020 if you're still in the middle of your taxes. This is how to get a hold of us. My name is Brad Uhlig, again, Jay Peterson. We just added a new associate broker to our team. His name is Charlie Middlehouse. So if you get a call from Charlie, you'll know he's part of us now. So be ready for that. So today we have Sabrina Calnan with BnB Excellent joining us. Sabrina is an Airbnb superhost herself. She's an Airbnb ambassador, helping to educate and train Airbnb hosts. And she owns a company, BnB Excellent, that focuses on short-term rental management and education, helping Airbnb hosts succeed. Today, she's going to talk about what to look for in an Airbnb, things you need to be aware of, watch out for, how to analyze a short-term rental. As we go through the slides, she'll take questions, so feel free to hit the Q&A up there. Jay's going to monitor that, and he'll interject with questions that he sees from that as we go through this. And then if we have time at the end, we'll go through an Airbnb case study. So feel free to ask questions as you go, and I'll just hand it over to Sabrina from here. Sabrina is a very experienced speaker and educator on topics related to short-term rentals, and we are excited to have her here today. Welcome, Sabrina.
Thank you so much, Brad. So excited. Thank you, Jay. Excited to be here today. Give me just one moment to get my screen share up here. And here we go. Yeah, so excited to be here today. Keep in mind, we're going to talk about Airbnb. We're going to talk about short-term rental in general. There's just so much involved in this topic that we will touch the surface. But please do feel free to ask questions as we go out through the class, and hopefully it will be a lot of fun and informative for everyone. So today we're going to go over how Airbnb works, if short-term rental is right for you, Some of the advantages of short-term rental, the current market with regards to coronavirus, guest expectations, the big thing, what to look for when picking a short-term rental investment and how to analyze those investments, and expenses that you need to consider with a short-term rental investment. So first I want to preface, Airbnb is a rental platform. So Airbnb specializes in short-term rentals or furnished rentals, but short-term rentals is defined as any rental that is rented out for less than 30 days at a time. So that could be listed on Vrbo, it could be listed on Craigslist. The Airbnb platform in particular is, sort of the disruptor in the industry. We've always had short-term rental. You'd go up and stay in the mountains for a few days at a time. People have been doing that for years. But what's new about Airbnb is the Airbnb rental platform brought short-term rental to your neighborhood. So now all of a sudden, you have the option to stay in somebody's neighborhood versus staying at a hotel when you visit a metro area like Denver or Austin or anywhere throughout the country these days. You're able to stay in an Airbnb. The platform is really flexible. You can list a room in your house. You can list an entire home. You can list an apartment for rent or a guest suite. In my case, I have a little carriage house on the back of my house. I live here in Denver in the West Wash Park neighborhood, and I list my little carriage house on the Airbnb platform full time. Now, one of the most interesting things I found about Airbnb over the years is that Airbnb really started out targeted towards more of a daily stay, but they have since evolved, and you can list your property for a week at a time or a month at a time. And Airbnb has been incredibly successful for us in renting out monthly rentals. About half of what we manage here in Denver is a monthly rental. And we used to use corporate housing websites, specialty websites for furnished rentals to advertise these, Zillow, things like that. And what we found starting a few years ago was that the Airbnb platform is where we were able to rent out the homes for the most amount of money and keep them the most filled. And so at this point in time, we don't even bother with some of these corporate housing websites. So Airbnb has become and evolved and become popular in many ways that you wouldn't expect. Airbnb now really is the platform for furnished rentals in your metro area, whereas it used to be more like a vacation platform in your metro area. And Airbnb now competes with some of the biggest hotel chains out there. The platform revenue has exceeded some of the biggest hotel chains. Airbnb had a public offering just late last year that did beautifully. They started at $65 a share, landed at $145 a share the first day, and the stock continues to do very well. The nice thing about the Airbnb platform is they collect the money for you. So as a landlord or investor, you don't have to worry about money collection. It's all done directly through the platform. So it works very much like a hotel. What happens is a guest will put down their credit card when they make a booking. They pay you out about a day after that booking begins, and it's just all paid, via ACH. The money appears in your account. The other thing that Airbnb has done with regards to money collection that previous platforms haven't done, Vrbo is just now starting to adopt this. Airbnb works directly with cities where Airbnb is really popular to collect lodging tax from the guest and remit it to the city on behalf of the host. So here in Denver, as a host, you don't have to worry about collecting lodger's tax at all. The only thing that you have to do is file a lodging tax return once per year, and it's supposed to be zeroed out. You don't make any sort of a payment at that time, but you file the return so that the city can sort of track where all of this money is coming from the lodging tax. And what was really revolutionary about Airbnb is Airbnb came out of the gate really to compete with a hotel. And so to make people feel comfortable with renting out their homes, guests staying in other people's homes, they base their platform on social proof. So Airbnb really encourages what they call instant book, where you and I, me as the host, you as the guest, we don't have a conversation about why you're coming to my house, how many people you have with you, or anything along those lines. A guest is able to log on to Airbnb, book a property without saying a word to that host, and then show up. And to make people feel comfortable with that, Airbnb has a review system where the host reviews the guest reviews the host. The idea behind that is that everyone behaves themselves because there's online public reviews attached to your profile. Now, since Airbnb has evolved a little bit, they've realized that social proof isn't necessarily good enough. So Airbnb does some back-end filtering on reservations as well to prevent risky reservations. They do it especially during the holiday weekends, where they don't allow someone to make an entire home booking unless someone has already been using the Airbnb platform and has positive reviews. So Airbnb has evolved a little bit from the social proof, but that's where they started, and they were really the first platform to do that. At least I should say the first rental platform to do that. I think they got the idea from Uber and Lyft, who have been doing that for a while.
Hey, Sabrina, we have a quick question about somebody saying Airbnb does not actually take deposits from guests. Her experience, apparently their experience has been, what do you recommend that I do to protect my property from damages from guests?
Yeah, so that is correct. So Airbnb has a setting where you can enter in a security deposit with each stay. But what happens is Airbnb doesn't actually collect that deposit from the guest. They only, if there's damage to your property, you have to file a claim through their resolution department. When you file that claim, first that claim goes to the guest, and the guest has the opportunity to say, okay, I'm sorry I did that, or absolutely deny it. Now, if the guest owns up to the damage and says, I'm so sorry, no worries, we'll pay for it, then Airbnb will take the money out of that deposit and give it to you as the host. But if the guest denies that, then you escalate the issue to Airbnb. It's important that you treat any damage to your Airbnb just as you would on a long-term rental with an actual security deposit. You have pictures, you have evidence, you have line item charges, you have invoices, you have receipts of the original purchases. You submit all of that to Airbnb. And if you have the proper documentation, typically Airbnb will pay you out. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the Airbnb resolution policies, they update that quite frequently. They've recently updated it in October of 2020. And Airbnb is being very clear that they aren't doing replacement value, they're doing depreciated value on furniture and things like that. They're not covering any sort of wear and tear. It's sort of hit and miss with Airbnb these days. Usually we've had no issue getting claims filed, but just recently, a window was broken at a colleague's property, and he said he filed a claim, and Airbnb told him that was wear and tear. Well, obviously a broken window is not wear and tear. So it's extremely important that you have the proper insurance on any sort of a short-term rental. And I think a lot of people don't think about this, like, hey, I decided to rent out my carriage house short-term. Well, what I need to do is I need to notify my homeowner's insurer based on the use of that property, because if they find I'm using my property in a different way than I'm insured for, they could deny all of my claims. So you need additional coverage. You need to notify your homeowner's insurer, and it's not a bad idea to have also an umbrella policy and maybe some sort of extra liability policy as well, even though Airbnb does provide that to a certain extent. So hopefully that's a whole subject in itself, and definitely something to be aware of, though.
Well, at VRBO, do they cover damages too or similar?
Yeah, so VRBO does it slightly differently. VRBO requires the guest to purchase travel. Essentially, it's like some sort of traveler's insurance to help cover any of those damages. And, you know, personally, I'll just be very curious to see now that Airbnb is a public company, if they change the way they do resolution and damages to something more straightforward, like a third party insurer that does that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so it depends on the platform, but that's how Airbnb works. So a couple of things to keep in mind with short-term rental. I think it's really easy for people to look at short-term rental through rose-colored glasses. You know, it is a lot of fun. My experience, you know, I've been doing it for 6 years for myself and several other people. My experiences have always been great, but I think short-term rental is built for certain personalities, just like landlording is built for certain personalities. If you are looking to be sort of DIY on your short-term rental, you should be very aware that short-term rentals are very time intensive to manage. Your average stay in a short-term rental is about 3.5 days. So you're looking at turns 2 times a week. It depends, of course, where your property is located. Some areas have average stays of a week or something along those lines, but your turns are much more frequent than on a long-term property. You're also, the big thing I like to emphasize to people is you're not just a landlord. You're not just an investor in real estate. When you get involved with short-term rental, you are all of a sudden in the hospitality industry and part of the travel industry as well. So being in hospitality, customer service is key. You need to be available to your guest 24/7. It does not matter if it's a holiday. It does not matter if it's the middle of the night. If someone is having an issue at your home, they can't get into the property, you need to be there to help them out, or someone needs to be there to help them out. So it is 24/7 communication. And one thing to keep in mind with this communication is that these rental platforms, both Vrbo and Airbnb, they favor the hosts that respond within minutes versus the host that responds within hours, because they want their customers to have a great customer service experience. So if you respond very quickly, in Airbnb, they place your listing higher in the search results, which means you're getting more bookings. The more bookings you have, the higher prices you're able to charge. And so being available and responding very quickly is absolutely important with short-term rental. Short-term rental is also a little bit more complicated than long-term rental because the pricing and the marketing strategy is very different than with long-term rental. Short-term rental, you're part of the hospitality industry, you're part of the travel industry. We all know that hotels and airlines, their prices fluctuate daily. They use like super smart actuaries and softwares and data analysis to price their properties and change those prices on a daily basis. Well, when you're a short-term rental host, to be the most successful, you also need to employ some of these pricing practices where your price is changing and fluctuating according to the supply and demand in your specific area. And so, one of the things that I personally recommend that our company does, and we help teach people how to do this, is we like to implement third-party pricing software and use that in combination with a personal touch to make sure the properties are priced appropriately. And we're getting in there and actively pricing properties constantly. Airbnb does have, as does Vrbo, they have smart pricing tools. I like to have a little bit more of an advanced tool. The Airbnb smart pricing, I find they do tend to make a lower recommendation than what I would price properties at least here in the Denver area. So I don't love the smart pricing tool, but there are plenty of people who love the smart pricing tool and it works very well for them. You also have to be aware that your income will fluctuate significantly on a monthly basis. Short-term rentals can be very seasonal. And you need to be aware of that. So if you are the person who needs to earn a certain amount of money every single month, short-term rental might not be for you. Here in Denver, during the low season, you will earn a third of what you'll earn in the high season. Of course, vacation and resort towns have similar high and low seasons as well. And what we've learned with coronavirus, which we'll go over in more detail, is that short-term rental responds very quickly to supply and demand. And should something happen where travel stops, your bookings can go down to almost nothing. So you should be able to sort of sustain these ups and downs without having heart palpitations, and just sort of look at them and know, like, this is just a part of the business. Lastly, you should be flexible with your use and exit strategy with short-term rental, because we haven't landed on rules and regulations quite yet with short-term rental. So these short-term rental rules and regulations, number one, they are different by location. So it's different city by city, county by county. And right now, these rules and regulations are ever changing. And what we find is that as cities implement these rules and regulations, it can, number one, affect whether or not you are actually able to rent your home out on a short-term basis. If you're still able to do so, it might affect your costs, because you might need to have a property manager in place. They may change. There's always talk about changing from a residential tax to a commercial tax with some of these short-term rentals. And if that happens, of course, it could take your profits out. So just be very aware that the rules, regulations, everything with short-term rental is changing quite a bit right now. We even see it changing in your traditional resort town that has had short-term rental forever. And so you need to be able to be flexible with that investment. And if it's something you enjoy using, then wonderful. If you feel comfortable selling it right away, great. Or you can convert it to a long-term rental. But it's just something to be aware of with that investment. And you should be able to weather that change. We don't see a lot of grandfathering in happening with any sort of rules and regulations. It happens on occasion, but not a lot. So advantages of short-term rentals, personally, I really enjoy short-term rental. I mean, I think it's very obvious I enjoy short-term rental. I used to be a long-term property manager. I sold off my long-term property management company to focus solely on short-term rental because I just enjoy it so much more. One of the reasons many people are interested in short-term rental is that it can be very lucrative if it's the right property. I want to emphasize that it is not guaranteed that a short-term rental will be more lucrative than a long-term rental. That really depends on the highest and best use for your property. You get flexible use of that property. You can always use it personally. If I wanted to have friends and family over and I don't want them to stay in my basement, I can close off my carriage house and have them stay in my carriage house. With COVID-19, a lot of people decided they didn't want people in their basements anymore. And so they closed off their basements, things like that. The more frequent maintenance and cleaning of the property means less wear and tear on that home. When you have turns every week or every, 2 times a week, that home is getting cleaned from top to bottom every 3.5 days in order to meet hospitality standards. And when you're cleaning a home that frequently, you are not getting the wear and tear on the home from like dirt on the floors or people not cleaning the bathrooms that you get on a long-term rental. The damage from not cleaning something can be permanent because it gets ingrained in like the actual fabric of the carpet and the tile grout and things like that. You get to be in that property more often. So it's just maintained better. You fix that doorknob, you touch up that scuff on the wall. Whereas with a long-term rental, it's less frequent maintenance. You can't get in there except for between tenants to do any sort of major work or repairs or even general maintenance. Tenants don't generally love like a big interruption. So you're typically not doing a lot more than repairing things and doing some basic like furnace tune-ups and gutter cleans and things like that with a long-term rental, whereas you can do a lot more with a short-term rental. And so they just stay more pristine. My carriage house, we remodeled that 5 years ago, and people, or maybe it's 6 years ago now. And people always come to me and they are surprised to hear that it was remodeled 6 years ago, because they think we did it like yesterday, because it just stays well maintained. So this is one of the big elephants in the room. One of the biggest questions that I tend to get these days is, how's the market with coronavirus? And I think coronavirus has surprised all of us in a lot of ways with short-term rentals. Coronavirus, we always knew this, but coronavirus really highlighted how much short-term rental is reactive to supply and demand in the market, how you are a part of the hospitality and the travel industries, and how you are affected by how those industries are doing. When everybody went shelter in place in late March and April, worldwide bookings were down 80%. So that's, 20% of people are still having some income, and it's less than what they were having before. Whereas when you compare that to long-term rentals, in the United States, March and April, I think the statistic was a decrease in rent rates of 2 to 3%. So on $2,000 a month, that's $30 or $60, no big deal, right? But 80% is huge. And one of the statistics that we hear about here in Denver is that 58% of people who do short-term rental, they depend on that income for their living expenses in some way. And so once this happened in late March and April, we saw a lot of people drop out of the short-term rental market. People converted properties to full out long-term rentals where they just did a 12-month lease. They sold off properties. The thing that we did for our clients is we remained to be furnished rentals for all of our clients, but we went in very quickly once we saw the cancellations coming through, and we changed our Airbnb settings to attract longer stays. So in March and April, almost all of our clients had monthly stays in their properties, and the rate that we were able to receive was pretty similar to what we would receive in the low season. So it was less than what we would normally receive in March and April, but we were able to keep our clients occupied. And then what happened was, kind of May, June, when the bans had been lifted, people were tired of staying at home, bookings came back with a vengeance. And so we saw bookings back up to normal levels, but the supply of short-term rental had decreased. And so I would say, and I was saying this before the webinar started, June through October, all of our properties were renting out at about 60% higher rates than they were the previous year at the same time. And the market continues to be very strong. Likewise, the Airbnb platform themselves experienced something very similar. Airbnb earns their money off of a percentage of the bookings. And so in late March, April, I think it was April when Airbnb did this, beginning of April, they laid off 25% of their staff right away. But then, come May and June, Airbnb once again saw bookings up to normal levels. And this was a worldwide thing. And investors were very impressed with how resilient Airbnb and short-term rentals were. And this is why Airbnb, despite the fact that we had a global pandemic, was able to go public at the end of last year and do very well. We saw definitely a shift in trends with traveling. We definitely see more local bookings. We have seen longer stays. A lot of people are working remotely indefinitely. So now I see this trend towards the workcation, where people go and they stay someplace beautiful where they really enjoy being. They work during the week, during the day, they go out at night, they go out, here in Colorado, you can enjoy the outdoors all year long. People go out and enjoy the outside over the weekends. And so that workcation has become very popular. And with that, different amenities become important. Wi-Fi is more important than it has ever been before. We are very clear in our listings that we have fast Wi-Fi. It is an absolute necessity that you have to have Wi-Fi fast enough to support multiple conference calls, because that is what people expect. And if people are working and they can't do their job because your internet is slow, it is a big deal. So Wi-Fi is very important. We even post some of our speeds in our listings because people are questioning it. At the very beginning of coronavirus, I would say in May, we were getting a lot of questions regarding cleaning and cleaning protocol. Airbnb themselves released extensive cleaning protocol, and with the cleaning protocol, people seem less concerned about it now. I have nobody ask me about it. And I think that's because people understand now the way that the virus spreads. They understand how to prevent it. People have become more comfortable with it. And it's just expected that you clean your property appropriately. And Airbnb did force everybody to opt into their cleaning protocol. And you should be doing that anyway, to be quite frank. So if you weren't doing it before, you should be doing it now. Parking is more important than it used to be because a lot of people are traveling by car. And then Airbnb and short-term rental has just been so popular because it's safer health-wise. You interact with less people than you would in a hotel or a hotel lobby. So having that own private space, having a self-check-in has become so important to people. And the industry is only growing right now, which I think is surprising to a lot of people, because I talk to a lot of people who just assume that short-term rental isn't doing well because the travel industry has been hit hard. But it's sort of, it's actually the exact opposite. It's doing very well. One of the things that Airbnb did, and this was something that did not make many hosts happy, is Airbnb, when the shelter in place went into place, just gave guests 100% refunds. They did not give the host the chance to negotiate that or talk with guests about that. They just gave them 100% refunds. So a lot of hosts were out of income without having a say. Eventually, Airbnb did decide to pay hosts 25% of the expected cancellation revenue. But since Airbnb does compete directly with the hotel, Airbnb really encourages hosts to have a flexible cancellation policy, which means that someone can cancel up to 24 hours in advance with a full refund anyway. So very few hosts got paid out on any of the cancellations they experienced in March and April. And it was something that did not sit very well with hosts, but certainly it doesn't seem to have deterred hosts from using the platform, because the platform just does work very well in getting your property rented out. Do we have questions, Jay?
One question's been hanging out here. This gentleman mentions, I take it high season in Denver for Airbnb is summertime?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
we tend to see the high season here in Denver. And of course, everything got shifted a little bit with COVID-19. And I'll be interested to see what 2021 does, because now people travel whenever. But the high season in Denver is typically the summertime, June, July, August. And then our slowest month tends to be February. And we're seeing a little bit of that typical slowdown right now, although it does tend to be, it's still very strong.
Okay. Another one here is, what is the best as a short-term rental property, a condo, townhome, or a house? Also, please your opinion on how many bedrooms would be the best for a property?
Sure. Yeah. And that's a very loaded question, because it very much depends on where your property is located. Yeah. And what the highest and best use in your area is. My personal preference here in Denver, and this is just my personal preference, is I really like the 1 and 2 bedroom properties here in Denver, because those appeal to a wide market of renters. You get the people who are coming to just vacation, sort of leisure travelers. In a 1 or 2 bedroom property, it works really well for a business traveler or a business traveler couple. And, or you get people coming to visit family members and things like that. So the occupancy level on a 1 and 2 bedroom is very high. And it tends to be what's most available here in Denver because we do have a primary residence restriction here in Denver. But those sometimes, it used to be that the big properties, the more people you can sleep, that was always recommended as the way to go by property managers because those were the most lucrative. And, with the way the market has changed in Denver, most of our properties are 1 and 2 bedrooms. So if you do have a larger property here in Denver, you're one of the few out there. So your demand is pretty high. So it very much depends on your location. If you are in Breckenridge or something like that, a condo is a nice, easy rental because you have certain level of maintenance provided for you by the HOA that you don't have on a home. But a lot of times HOAs, depending on the location, have restrictions on short-term rentals. So here in Denver, most HOAs and most covenant communities don't allow short-term rental. They have either a minimum lease term or some sort of a restriction on, one household being in a home type thing. So yeah, the best investment is, I always say, is one that speaks to you, one that you're excited about. And there is certainly a lot of software out there to help you analyze like your rates on returns and how much revenue you can make and things like that, which we'll send out links to all of that after this class.
Somebody else asked, what are the best areas to invest in Denver? That could be subjective as well. Based on the property you have, like you just said, it depends on location. So, whether you own property downtown and people are hitting all the bars and restaurants down there, or if they want to be in Cherry Creek and do shopping and restaurants there, I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, a property that is walkable, that you can get to restaurants easily, to bars easily, those properties tend to do very well. That's, I think, one of the appeals for my property being in West Wash Park. Like you're just really central to a lot of things. And it's really dependent on supply and demand. So, I have heard of people who have rented out a 1-bedroom condo in Aurora doing just as well as someone close to downtown Denver. But that is because they're the only short-term rental there. So as soon as other people get wind of how well they're doing, their returns quickly diminish. And so that's one thing to be aware of is it's very dependent on supply and demand. And so if you're in an area that people wouldn't naturally be searching for to stay, you want to be one of the only rentals in that area. And you want to make sure you're somehow able to get the word out about that one.
Hey, Sabrina, we're about 45 minutes in. I just want to make sure we have time to get through all your slides. And
yeah,
if Jay needs to couch some of these questions, because I know you're going to hit on a lot of these.
Yeah. So much to talk about. So I'll go through the slides. I'll speed through them, and then we can open it up for questions. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
All right. So just, things to be aware of, guest expectations with a short-term rental, those have evolved very much over time. Really, hotels or better standards are expected. You provide towels, linens, shampoos, all of that fun stuff that anyone would expect to have in a hotel. I would say, think about like your basic Marriott or your Hilton level hotel, not so much like a Motel 6 or something like that, is what you want to provide. In fact, people even expect more from an Airbnb than they do expect from a hotel. It's nice to provide them with coffee and tea, some basic spices for cooking and things like that. If you have a full kitchen, be sure to provide all of the items needed to cook a nice family meal for someone who enjoys cooking. So, include that blender, that crock pot, that big saucepan to make a big thing of spaghetti. Include anything that you can think of that someone would need to cook a nice meal for their family. You do want to have, I recommend stylish furnishings and decor. Really, the only way that people judge your property is based on pictures, and making sure you have a property that pictures nicely makes all the difference in the world. And at the very least, you need to have a clean and comfortable space. But if you could spruce it up even just a little bit with like some extra color or decor, that helps immensely in the success of your property. And then you always want to make sure that if you have anything special like a hot tub or Nespresso or Alexa, that is highlighted in your listing. And a lot of guests will, they just love that. So it's helpful to have those things. And when you're looking at an investment property, we've talked a lot about this. You want to look at each property from sort of the traveler's point of view. What is the highest and best use for this property? If you have a ski in, ski out condo in Breckenridge, the highest and best use of that property is definitely a short-term rental, and your travelers are skiers, and you want to sort of cater the way you plan that rental to those travelers. You want to consider how many guests the unit can sleep. And one thing that is very important to consider is how many bathrooms does the place have? If you have a 5-bedroom home with 1 bathroom, don't put 10 people in that house. Or even a 3-bed, we see sometimes people have 3-bedroom homes with 1 bathroom. I would not put 6 people to 1 bathroom. And that's probably not the kind of guest that you want to attract to a home anyway. So you need to consider sort of the condition and the functionality of the home. It's always easier to have a short-term rental where everything works seamlessly, where you don't have to sit there and explain to the guests that the water pressure in the upstairs bathroom is low when somebody's using the kitchen sink because the way the pipes work, or things like that. So having a property that is fully functional, making sure you've invested, or someone has invested maybe before you bought it, and having a property that has good electrical, good plumbing, enough bathrooms for the number of people that you want to have in there, enough room in the kitchen to, if you have, 3 bedrooms, be able to seat 6 people in that kitchen and that living room. So think about the way travelers will live and the way travelers will stay and what they are looking for. Now, with short-term rental, it's different than long-term rental. There are a lot of additional expenses to consider with short-term rental. Of course, you have your cleaning costs. You're cleaning the property twice a week. We're talking 75 to 100 cleans per year. So if you have a cleaner that charges you $100 to clean your property, you're looking at $10,000 in cleaning costs. And yes, you do earn this money by charging the guest a cleaning fee as well. But anywhere you're doing an analysis on a rental, that top line revenue includes the cleaning fee that you collect. So you have to keep that in mind. It's money that comes in and then goes right out. Your management fee is something really to consider. We've talked about how time intense short-term rental can be. You need to be honest with yourself as to whether or not you need a property manager. If you're looking for someone like me, where we do a virtual management, we do everything we can for the property without actually going to the property. So we take away about 95% of the work. Our expertise is definitely in marketing and pricing your property for the most revenue. If you need help, and then communicating with guests and doing the damage claims and things like that. If you need help with those types of things, you're not available 24/7 to manage guests, 10% is what we charge. But if you're looking for a full service manager, you're just not near the property, or the rules and regulations require that, you're looking at anywhere between 25% to 55%. And it's more like 35 to 55 if you're up in a resort town or the mountains. So that takes away, that's a huge chunk out of your profit that you need to consider. You're also providing supplies, toilet paper, paper towels, coffee, tea, hand soaps, dishwashing soap, all of that. You're providing that, that on a 2-bedroom property is easily about $100 a month. So you do need to consider those costs. You are paying for all of the utilities, cable and internet. You have to have fast internet. Cable used to be a must-have, but these days, so few people really care, but you have to have them be able to access all of the streaming apps like Netflix and Hulu and things like that. And then maintenance, you are maintaining that property to the utmost level. So yard care, snow removal, unless you plan to drive to that property and do that stuff, you need to consider those expenses. We talked about it briefly. You need to have the appropriate insurance in place. Short-term insurance on a short-term rental does tend to be more expensive than insurance on a long-term rental. If we're talking about a rider on your primary residence, that's relatively inexpensive. It's about 20% higher. But if you're talking about a property that's rented out short-term, full-time, you're looking at more of a commercial type policy. So you just need to be aware of that. And then be aware that when you're looking at revenue estimates for short-term rental, the vacancy is usually built in with that. So you don't have to worry about adding that extra. How to analyze a short-term investment. And this is a whole class in itself, but I really recommend using third-party softwares to gain some insight into the market. I really like a company called AirBnB. And they are actually located in Colorado here. They're local, but they have a direct into Vrbo and into Airbnb. So they have all of the data. I also really like a company called Price Labs, another company, Wheelhouse. We will send out links to all of this after the class, but really utilizing these third-party softwares to gain insight into the market. AirDNA they have tools to help you pick the best areas to invest in short-term rentals. Keep in mind that when you are looking at estimated revenue, this top line revenue is always on an annual basis because your monthly revenue fluctuates so much. So be aware of that. The top line revenue also includes the cleaning fees collected on the property, and be aware that cleaning fees can account for about 20% of your revenue very easily. And that money goes out to your cleaner unless you're planning on cleaning your own home, which is very time intensive. And then be aware of the rules and regulations in the areas that you're looking for. Does the area require that you have a local contact where someone can be to the property within an hour? That's something that they require up in Vail. So essentially, most people have to have a property manager in place. Or does it need to be your primary residence? And will you be fined immense amounts of money for running an Airbnb that isn't a primary residence or just flat out shut down? And so knowing those rules and regulations before you start shopping is very important, and be aware that those rules and regulations are completely local to the location. So just quickly about my company a little bit more. My focus is helping hosts to succeed. We are releasing some online courses that will be released at the end of the month. Really some how-to courses on how to set your Airbnb up for success and give you the tools and everything you need to know to be a successful Airbnb host. If you're already comfortable hosting, or if you've taken the how-to course and if you become comfortable hosting, I definitely recommend doing our intensive course where we really teach you to level it up. We'll give you all of our secrets on pricing properties, using the third-party softwares, really marketing that property. And then if you just need someone to help you get started, We offer a set you up for success program where we'll help you create your listing. We'll teach you the important pieces and nuances of creating that listing. We'll price your property appropriately by doing an in-depth analysis, and then we'll teach you how to continue pricing that property. So I'm always here and open to, consulting and educating and helping you out. I just really feel like short-term rental is a means to a lot of different flexibility and can be very financially beneficial. And so just quickly, because I know we're short on time, this is an example.
Take your time, Sabrina. You're good.
Thank you, Brad. This is an example of, the difference between putting up an Airbnb listing and just hoping for the best, or, putting it up and not treating it like a business, versus implementing some of our strategies and treating your short-term listing as a business. You can see that this client brought us on. She has a basement rental here in Denver in February of 2019. And as soon as we started implementing our strategies with her, her revenue increased significantly. We pulled this chart pretty early on in the year. And, by the time the end of the year came out, all of her slow months, September, October, November, well surpassed the previous year. And so she ended up, because of using these strategies and sort of just treating the rental as a business versus like a side gig, was able to get a 40% higher nightly rate and earn an extra $1,000 a month on what is just a basement rental here in Denver. And so, this is what we do. We help hosts to get the most out of the investment that they have and get the most out of their properties. So I hope that I can help anybody with that. Feel free to reach out to me after class, and I'm glad to answer any questions or help you in any way that I can. And then we can open it up for questions.
Okay. This is a question I'm sure is on most of our minds that have not done Airbnbs or short-term rentals. Do you have any short-term rental horror stories you could share, such as stolen furniture or appliances or massive parties where there has been enough cleanup, something like that?
Yeah. I mean, it happens, right? Like, I would say 99% of the experiences are good. I've been doing this now for about 6 years. I personally have never had a bad experience in my carriage, like not even a bad experience, like not even small damages. And then for the properties that we help manage, we really haven't had any terrible experiences. We did have someone who drove into the garage door in one of the properties. And so that we had to replace that garage door. We ended up getting paid out on that with no issue. But I do have, a colleague who they had a party come to their home. And it was a girl who rented out the home for just the weekend or one night or something like that. And she asked if she could have a few friends over, and a few friends ended up being like 30 or 40 friends. And these friends were gang members.
Oh, no.
And they partied until 2 a.m. And, this was in a nice neighborhood here in Denver where you wouldn't really expect this sort of party. And the homeowner was home the entire time because she lives on the premises. She lived upstairs. The party was in the basement. She was very, she's very low key and just very laid back. So she didn't mind the party so much until it started getting rowdy. And then about 2 a.m, she went down there and she said, "Look, anyone who's here after this time, I have an extra person fee of X number of dollars. I'm charging this." And they left, but then they went out into the street and got rowdy there, and there were gunshots, and people started trying to run back into the property.
Wow.
Luckily, the homeowner's boyfriend, and I think this is incredibly brave because I would be way too scared to do this, stood at the door. He had a conceal and carry permit, and so he stood at the door with his gun and didn't let people in.
Wow.
And eventually the cops were called, the cops came, everybody dissipated. But the property was left very, very damaged. And she, to this day, is still trying to negotiate. It's been a couple of months. She's trying to negotiate payment with Airbnb, and Airbnb is telling her that this is a homeowner's insurance claim and they're offering to only pay out on the deductible. And so she's going back and forth with them right now. So there is a risk to short-term rental. Short-term
The
rental,
lesson there is call the cops early.
call the cops
Right.
I mean,
early. Yeah.
don't allow. I mean, she started to allow it and then she let it go for too long, right?
Yeah, she did. And, you know, had she called the cops earlier, it might have been prevented. The one thing she said to me was the cops, this was right during the time that there were a lot of Black Lives Matter protests, and the cops, you know, the people left, but the cops did not enforce anything because they were feeling uncomfortable really enforcing things themselves
Oh, I see. Because of the
Black Lives
yeah,
Matter
I get it. No,
was
I
happening.
understand.
Yeah.
I
So
understand.
yeah, I mean, I mean, she was so calm about it. I would have been freaking out the whole situation, but yeah, call the cops early, you know, and one of the things, you know, she's a more lackadaisical host. She is a 420 friendly host.
Oh,
You know, she's young, she'll hang out with her guests and things like that. I am personally just a very square host. And if anyone ever asks me if they can smoke outside, I'm kind of you know, I'm polite, but I'm kind of a jerk about it. And we make very clear in a lot of our listings that there's no smoking anywhere on the premises. And not within 15 feet of the premises, and very clearly establishing those expectations and house rules, not only in your listing, but when someone makes their booking, we always send a confirmation message, and then we remind them our most important house rules, which are always quiet hours and no smoking anywhere. And then at that point, they're like, oh, well, I'm not that person. They can cancel that booking
Right,
very
exactly.
quickly.
Yeah.
So there are ways, but you are not able to do a background check through Airbnb. Verbo nor Airbnb does any kind of screening on people. Sometimes they do have you verify your account with a government ID. It's not required. So as a host, you can require that only people who have that can book your property. But you put some faith in humanity with short-term rental for sure.
one question here is a little, I don't know if I fully understand it, but it says you charge 10% to do 95% of the leaseor work. What's the 5% you don't do?
Yeah, so yeah, that's actually a very good question. So
Okay.
we do what I always like to describe ourselves as is a virtual manager. So our real expertise is in pricing and marketing your booking appropriately, doing those guest communications to avoid trouble, and doing the scheduling with the cleaners. Of course, we have good cleaners we can put in place for you, and doing any of the resolution claims. We're pretty good at that because we know what Airbnb expects. But what we do require from a host is we require what we call a general manager. So someone that we can contact anytime should there be some sort of a maintenance issue at the property, or if the guest needs you to come to the property for some reason. So, you know, what we always recommend is our hosts, if it's your own property and you're participating in it, you check in on the property between every couple of stays. Our cleaners do a very nice job of reporting damages and taking pictures of the property, but they don't have the same eye as a homeowner or someone who's performing quality control. So we ask that you do that as the homeowner, and you are essentially solely responsible for the maintenance of your property that's outside of the guest standards, essentially. And we can put, you know, we do about 50% 30-day plus rentals where there isn't, you know, some of our landlords are out of state and things like that. And we can help them put a general manager in place if that's necessary.
Well, somebody asked if your company manages property in other states, so that answers that, right?
Yeah, we stick to the management in Denver, but we can certainly help to educate and help set up listings anywhere.
Okay. Somebody's asking, do you recommend listing property in both Airbnb and VRBO?
I think it depends on your location. So once you list your property on both platforms, you have some additional complications. You need to make sure that the calendars are linked up appropriately. A lot of people will use a separate channel manager to do that. But if you are in a more traditional resort area, like in the mountains, you absolutely need to be listed on both Vrbo and Airbnb. We used to see that Vrbo really had the market in the resort towns. 90% of bookings would come through Vrbo, but these days Airbnb is catching on, and now it's like 50-50. So I recommend being on all of the platforms if you're located in a resort area. But what we found in Denver specifically, and I would guess it's similar in most metro areas, is that the Airbnb platform works beautifully and you don't even need Vrbo.
Okay. What are the net cap rates for reasonably good property in Denver?
Say that again. I missed the first part.
What are the net cap rates for reasonably good property in Denver?
That's a very good question. And it's a hard question to answer because generally what I find is if you are doing short-term rental in Denver, it's only makes sense to do it on your primary residence. I can give you a quick example of how it works out for me. My little carriage house is 500 square feet, 1 bedroom, 1 bath. I rent that out. If I were to rent that out long-term unfurnished on a traditional lease, I'm earning around $1,200 to $1,300 a month on that rental. But renting it out short-term, net of my cleaning fees and my supplies, I earn about $2,500 a month. And the reason it's so lucrative on a primary residence is because a lot of those expenses, those big expenses that you have on a short-term rental investment, you don't have on a primary residence. I already pay for cable and internet. I already furnish the home. I already have my snow removed and my lawn mowed and the home is maintained. I don't need a full service property manager on site. So it works really well on a primary residence. But what we find is once you start doing the math here in Denver on, like, for example, a nice townhome in Highlands, one of those brand new builds where it's 2 bedroom, 3 bath sort of thing, your investment is better off long-term, or at least the same as short-term. And so cap rate can be really, it can actually end up being quite low. And this might be a good time to sort of push forward to that case study a little bit. So here is a listing in Denver at 161 South Pearl Street, fun neighborhood here in Denver. It's a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath, 8 guests. And the estimated revenue on that is almost $80,000. But as you can see, I start doing the math. I start adding in that management fee. Property tax is something you would have on a short or long-term rental, but I add in the cleaning fees because that $80,000 includes the cleaning fees collected. Start doing maintenance, insurance, all of that fun stuff. Look at that cap rate at 2.15. That's not so good, right? And this property I think is listed for $900,000 or something like that. So, I think you guys could, of course, speak to the cap rate on long-term rental a little bit better.
I mean, if you have a loan on that property, you're losing money every month.
Yeah. And it would be, on a long-term rental in Denver, it's what, between 5% and 6% typically. Is that right, guys?
Well, you would hope.
Yeah. Central
Denver, you get down into the 4s, and just
right.
depends.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess to answer the question, I unless it's your primary residence, I don't necessarily think that short-term investing in Denver is the best way to go. And we didn't touch on this, because there wasn't enough time, but actually in Denver, a property has to be your primary
I was
residence.
gonna ask you
Yeah.
about that.
In order to rent it out short term, as the rules and regulations stand today.
Right.
Another one, do you recommend close by properties to your primary residence? I mean, obviously that's easier to get there in case you want to kind of take control of a little bit of the management, but I guess it's subjective, right?
Yeah, I think that depends on your personal lifestyle and what you're looking to get out of the property. You know, certainly you will save money if you can be nearby and help participate in the management of your own property. But it is very time intensive, so that's a trade-off.
Yeah. Somebody's asking, does the owner get to approve the renters before they book the Airbnb? And you mentioned something about not being able to run background checks, but do you approve them before they book it?
Yeah, so you can set up your listing two different ways in Airbnb. Airbnb encourages instant book, which means you don't have to approve them. But when you do instant book, what you can do is you can require that they have a verified government ID, and you can also require that they have positive Airbnb reviews before someone can instant book your property. Airbnb definitely favors the listing that offers instant book and will make that listing rank higher in the Airbnb search results. So like I said, we kind of control the quality of the tenant through setting expectations and communication with the tenant, but you do have the option to require that someone makes what they call an inquiry. So they ask you if they can book before you approve that booking every time. But Airbnb doesn't favor that listing in the same way that they do the instant book.
Okay, just a couple more here. Have you heard of a company called Evolve? Is it good or bad? Do they manage short-term rentals? It's Evolve.
Yes, yeah, I'm very familiar with Evolve, and Evolve is they're local here. They work everywhere, but they are local to Denver, which is, I think, really cool. So Evolve, they really work on your property or manage your property on the booking side of things. So essentially they list your property. Once it's booked, they step out of that process. So as the host, once the property is booked, you're responsible for scheduling the cleaners. You're responsible for communicating with that guest, making sure they're in the property. Evolve does a lot on the front end where they basically market and price your property for you. And that's about where it ends with them. Evolve is nice because they are a larger company. They have a pretty strong presence nationwide. They can take direct bookings through their website. And then the other thing that Evolve offers is I think they have some level of insurance that comes with all of their bookings as well. So it's a service. Many people use it. Many people love it. But they are not a property manager by any means.
So use them instead of Airbnb, not using with Airbnb, right?
You use them with Airbnb. So they will list your property on all the platforms.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So it's kind of tied in with this last question. Is outside of listing property on Airbnb, what are some of your marketing strategies that you deploy to maximize occupancy?
Yeah, so we list on Airbnb, but a lot of our strategies are within the Airbnb platform. We are constantly updating our listings. Airbnb really loves that. We are keeping our calendars constantly up to date and changing strategies with regards to discounts and pricing and things like that. So that keeps us very highly ranked on Airbnb. Other strategies we use, I'm very well connected here in Denver. And so oftentimes I will get people and real estate agents who come to me with clients who need a place to land for a month or two. So we can very easily rent properties outside of Airbnb, especially like I said, half of what we manage is a monthly rental. So a lot of times those just come through pure networking. But right now, and of course, we're always watching what's working and what's not working. The Airbnb platform is the only platform that we use. Another very popular listing site in town is Furnish Finders. And people, I've heard that people are very busy booking out through Furnish Finders as well, but I find Furnish Finders is more for a property that is for people who are more on a budget. And the way we market our properties is at the higher rates and the higher end. So we don't find Furnish Finders to be a great fit for us.
Okay. Well, those are all the questions.
All right.
Well, thanks, Sabrina. I really appreciate you joining us today. It's been awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anybody out there, we're going to wrap it up. We will send out a recording of this webinar to anybody who signed up. And if you're looking to buy or sell a property, contact Jay and I. And if you're interested in talking to Sabrina, let's see, Sabrina, you had contact information for yourself.
Yeah, let me go back here. Yep, there's my contact information. The name of the company is BnB Excellent. If you Google it or go to our website, it's pretty easy to find online.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you. And we're going to conclude.
All right, thanks
Thanks everyone for jumping on the seminar.
Have a great day.